Broadcasting the information the mainstream media won't touch. This is The Richie Allen Show in association with DavidIke.com.
My next guest is no stranger to us, to the programme. She's a fantastic woman. Really love having her on the show. She's always busy. She's over there in DC at the moment. She came to international attention, of course, way back. Well, I say way back. It's only 8 or 9 years ago. Blowing the whistle on endemic corruption at the World Bank. She is a lawyer. Ever since then, she's been campaigning to raise awareness about how the financial institutions of the world, and we're not just talking about the IMF, and we're not just talking about the World Bank, but all the institutions, the so-called pillars of society. She's been out there telling people, reminding people who these institutions, who they really are, what they really are, and why we should know about them. Let's welcome back to the programme our great friend Karen Hudes. Karen, welcome back.
Thanks for the warm welcome, Richie. Glad to be with you all.
You always get a warm welcome, and you can go to kahudes.net, by the way. That's Karen's website. It's the website of the law offices of Karen Hudes. Now, we haven't spoken, you and I, since early September, which is kind of unusual, really. I don't know why that is, but a lot has probably been going on since then for you, and you can get into some of that, of course, if you want. The floor is yours. But you know what, Karen? Number of people have been on the programme recently to talk about what they feel is a coming planned massive financial crash, which they believe will be used as an excuse to further brutalise people using the horrific austerity measures designed to basically screw people to the wall and put people into basically oblivion. What do you think about an impending financial crash? We know that share prices globally have been dropping dramatically in recent days. What say you?
I say that was their intention, but they've been overpowered by a coalition that is very much in existence, and we're going to be taking over the reins. And the way we're doing it is they're crashing themselves. They're crashing their fake currencies, but those are not the real currencies. We're just going to be replacing their currencies with our currencies.
Now, remind, because we've gotten into this in the programme before, remind our listeners, give them the Cliff Notes version, the easy to understand version of how you plan and your organisation plans to usurp the fiat fake currency system with a new system. How's that going to work?
Okay, it's going to work beautifully, and because this has been in the works for 50 years, at the end of more than 50 years. We should have had our real currencies in 2005, but it's taken us a while to get our act together, and our act is very much together. 50 years ago, there was a trust that was created at the end of World War II by Jose Rizal, who was something called the Black Pope. That is the superior general of the Jesuits, and he was the Black Pope for 3 years, and during that time he had control over the world's monetary gold reserves. And what he did was he used his lawyer Ferdinand Marcos to put those monetary gold reserves in a trust for 50 years. The reason for that is because there's a legal concept called the statute of limitations. It means that if you don't get your hands on what you claim is yours, after 50 years, you've lost your claim. This is an old Roman concept. The reason for that is that you can't prove your claim because all of the witnesses have died. So that was deliberately agreed to in something called a bilateral Mansfield breakthrough successor agreement. You can see the signatures. I've been posting this for many, many years. It was signed by all of the government leaders, all of the royalty, and it's binding. And now anybody who's claiming that it's their gold has no claim, because that agreement also provides that the courts can't be judging the claims anymore. That's why when the International Court of Justice decided to try to invalidate the trust documents that Ferdinand Marcos created, I went back and I invalidated that statement of the International Court of Justice. And the CIA followed up, relying on that decision it was a memo actually of the International Court of Justice. And I said, no, sorry, guys, this doesn't cut it. You've been cut off deliberately by the statute of limitations, and that was what you agreed to going in. Because what they thought after 50 years, nobody would find out about it, and they could just get their hands back on it. But I did find out about it from a fellow named Wolfgang Struck. And if you've been following what's been going on in the internet, Wolfgang has been pushing to get me to recognize the son of Marcos and Queen Elizabeth. He's a fellow named ASM. And I said, first of all, he's got to be recognized by the Board of Governors of the World Bank and IMF before he has any rights. And we're not recognizing him. And then, of course, we can go into this a little bit later on, but it turns out that Queen Elizabeth II is illegitimate.
I'll come back to that in a second. Question we get asked all the time when we talk about these subjects is a question I can't answer. Where is the world's gold? Where's the bulk of it? Who owns, who are the owners of the world's collective gold, Karen?
We are. This trust is called TVM LSM 666. That's the initials of Ferdinand Marcos's sons. And it's in a trust that is administered by the Ministers of Finance and Development on the World Bank and IMF Board of Governors. And a lot of people get very nervous because of the terrible things that the World Bank and IMF have been doing. And the reason why that's happened is because they've been subjected to something called state capture, which is to say that this conglomerate that consists of all the central banks and 40% of the assets of the 43,000 companies that are traded on the capital markets, that this network, it's called the super entity by three mathematicians at the Federal Institute of Technology that discovered this conglomerate. That group has been dominating the World Bank. Christine Lagarde is just a puppet of that network. So is Jim Kim. And as a matter of fact, I've fired both of those individuals. When I say it's actually the Board of Governors, because I've been agreeing with them in order for me to be able to invalidate these attempts to steal the world's gold. I have to have the authority to do that. So I've been working with the Board of Governors for a long time. And at the annual meetings in Peru in October, this was right after we spoke, I agreed. I met with about 20 of them. I got into the meetings because I have a security badge, and that security badge has been deactivated. But in Peru, it looked just like a security badge. They couldn't tell it was deactivated, so they let me right into the meetings, and I stayed there for 6 hours, and I met with about 20 delegations, including 2 ministers of finance, Arun Jaitley, the India's Minister of Finance, and also the Minister of Finance for Malawi. And we agreed that I am allowed to make statements on behalf of the Board of Governors, and if any country disagrees with my statements, then they have to go on record in writing. And I'm very careful to either clear things in advance or to do the minimum that needs to be done, because you were talking at the very beginning about a possible crash. We need to be able to exchange those paper currencies for the currencies issued by the governments. The central banks are private banks. They're not governments. And we're going to be replacing all the currencies with government-issued currency. And the implications for that is that when somebody prints paper currency, they get to keep the difference between what the face amount of the bill is and what it costs them to print the bill. That's called seigniorage. And right now, the private banks are keeping it, plus they're getting to charge interest on country debt. So this is a big scam. It turns out, however, that those banks, this network, owes us more than we owe them, because in the 30s, they issued bonds. They're called Treaty of Versailles bonds. What happened was they went around collecting the gold from the royalty. They told the royalty that they were going to lose their gold because war was coming. So they gave bonds instead, and the bonds carried interest and were payable in gold. And that interest has been accruing since the 30s. It's now worth $2 quadrillion. And that's more than the country debt. So we can just extinguish country debt. You know, the catastrophe that everybody was saying was happening in Greece, and trying to put austerity programs in place, trying to buy up all the assets of the countries.
Well, that's right. That's what austerity was all about, of course. And you and I have gotten into this so many times. But let me ask you this, right? I've looked over the last 12 months at a lot of the documentation you've provided. And you know, Karen, and you're well aware of this, and I'm not kissing your backside when I say this, but it's important that I say this. You're incredibly, incredibly bright, and you understand most of the terminology that you use, but many of us don't understand it. And I look through the documentation, and I see some of these documents. I read about Marcos and the Yamashita treasures, and I read all this stuff, and I said, this is very good, it's compelling. But nobody has ever taken on the central banks before and won. Nobody. These banks, as we well know, and I know you know this, but for the benefit of our listeners, they control everything. They decide who gets to run for office. They decide who wins elections, who doesn't win elections. They start wars on a whim. They destabilise and remove governments on a whim. How can somebody like you, with the greatest respect, take on that system? Because you're not going to be supported by the mainstream media, which is owned by the same organisations. I mean, you're coming on programmes like this, which is great. You do your own radio stuff, and you do other radio programmes, and it's really great that you get to say these things. But as big as our audience is, it's limited and it's tiny compared to audiences that the BBC would have and CNN. How can you possibly take on these people, even with right on your side?
It's easy, Richie. If I were acting alone, obviously I wouldn't get anywhere. But what I'm doing is I'm simply the mouthpiece for a much bigger and stronger coalition. In 2004, a political scientist named Jacek Kugler came to the World Bank. He was working for the Defense Department. He was working for a professor at the National War College, and he developed a very powerful game theory model which predicted how coalitions would form. And this is 90 to 95% accurate. It has been tracking like clockwork, and it basically says that people will do what's in their own interest. They won't do what's in the interest of the network of global corporate control. So when you see the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, when you see the group of 77, that's 134 developing countries, if those countries are able to work together, then they're going to be, who wants to be paying this interest on country debt, which is a scam? And what happened at the end of World War II is Jose Rizal put the world's monetary gold reserves in a trust for these countries. So we are the ones that own the gold, not this network.
I totally believe you. You convinced me of this before. And that's why I love having you back. And you know very well you have enemies. Whenever I invite you on the programme, and you must be getting to people, because you're one of the few that when I get you on, I get bombarded by emails. Oh, you shouldn't have her on. She's a shill and she's disinformation and all of this. And I respectfully write back to everybody and say, well, no, she's not. She's certainly not a shill and she's not disinformation. There is a lot of historical evidence to back up what she's saying. The only issue I have with it, and I keep saying this to you and you keep getting frustrated, quite rightly, we live in this paradigm, like it or lump it, where we live under the illusion that we live in a democracy, and the majority of people in our towns and in our cities believe they're free, Karen. You know this. You'll have neighbours who think you're crazy. I have neighbours who think I'm crazy. They think we're free because we get to elect men and women who do their best for us. Because if they didn't, they wouldn't get in 3 years' time or in 4 years' time. This is the madness of it. In order for the righteous claims that you're making to be taken seriously, unfortunately, it still depends on a political class saying, okay, what this woman is saying is true, blah, blah, blah. And that's where I think you're going to keep running into brick walls, but you disagree.
I can argue with you by letting you see what information people are providing me. Think about a soccer team going back and forth, up and down the field. They are passing me the ball for me to score, and I'm scoring time in and time out. And then whenever the network of global corporate control tries to score, they get taken out. We have knocked them down. I can show you all the repeated times, but I'll just give you 2 examples. I also have a TV show that gets broadcast on Tuesday evenings, and then I put it up on YouTube. Somebody inside the Queen Elizabeth's entourage sent us a clip, and I think it was actually put on the internet first before it was sent to us, showing how when she was in her early teens, she did a Nazi salute. This is very damaging. Yes?
Yes, if I remember, it would have, yes, it was her or her sister, Margaret.
No, it was her.
Was it her?
Was
it?
her.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
Her.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, whether it was her or not. Yes, I mean, we know the background of that family and her husband and his background and his sisters and who they were married to. But go on anyway, tell us about this. I've seen the clip. It was it was on tabloid media here and it was covered. Yeah, go ahead. She was very young though. She was only a child at the time.
Okay, now here's the point. Here's the knockdown. Here's the knockout. Queen Elizabeth, is illegitimate. She has no right to be sitting on the throne. She's a pretender. And I got this information from a Dutch knight. I know his name. I know how to contact him, but I'm protecting his identity. I've called him Sir Hank, and I've quoted from the emails he sent me. So let me read you what he said. He said, "We have more letters from Queen Victoria to her firstborn son." And by the way, Queen Victoria's father was Jacob Rothschild. And if you see a picture of Jacob Rothschild next to her, there can be no denying that that's exactly who her father is. There's a very striking resemblance.
Yeah,
okay.
I've heard this theory before myself, yeah.
No, it's not a theory. It's not a theory. And the thing is...
Well, I can only say that I haven't seen definitive proof of it,
right.
so I can only say it's a theory.
There is also DNA evidence of her firstborn son, and she never divorced her husband. Who was her husband? He was Prince George V of Hanover. So Queen Elizabeth's great-grandfather was illegitimate. You can't have 2 husbands. She never divorced her first husband, and her first son has descendants in Portugal. And they have a lot of proof. Let me read you some of the proof they have. They have swords, paintings, statues, blood DNA ready to be examined, coins, a couple of personal letters from Queen Victoria, Queen Victoria's personal diary, royal emblems, royal seals, signatures of Queen Victoria on certain items, the ring seal of Queen Victoria's husband, whom she never divorced, and there's pictures of Prince George V of Hanover, and there's a book which is the product of 19 years of research, and there was $300,000 spent on it. And then there's a picture of the British monarchy family tree. And the descendant of Queen Victoria's son, his name is Francisco Manuel. He was called into the British embassy in Lisbon, Portugal, 3 or 4 days after Princess Diana died to be informed that she was murdered and that it was not an accident. Why would this man be called into the embassy to be personally informed regarding this event if he is not the hidden king of England.
It's very intriguing that. Some of our listeners would say, respectfully would say, what's the difference? What difference does it make who inhabits the throne of England? Because
that's the whole point, Richie.
Yeah.
And I said back to Hank, because Hank had a plan for me. He said, let's get this man back on the throne, and he will invalidate what happened with the Magna Carta, which means that the throne of England is actually meaningless because the kingdom has been passed to the Vatican. So I said, I don't want him on the throne and have him invalidate the Magna Carta. It's going to be up to the people if they want anybody on their throne. Now the United Kingdom is an interregnum. And that is what I have been saying to Parliament, because the members of Parliament know full well, I've been in touch with them for many, many years. They are not serving the interests of the people. If they were, they would have accepted the gold that was put aside in this trust and that should have been delivered in 2005. From 2005 until this very day, we should not be under this matrix.
Yeah, under this lunatic system. Let's do a quick recap for people. And we'll do the recap. I'm going to say something I never thought I'd say on radio in my 16, 17-year career. But let's do the absolute dumbed-down version of this for people. I could recap just to prove that I've been listening to you, because I have been. But I'm going to let you do it. We're talking about treaties and agreements that were made 50, 60, 70 years ago about the ownership of the collective gold of the world. And that gold was to be for the people of the world. We've had Karen on programmes before talking about the global debt facility. Explain it. Explain it as if you were explaining it to somebody who was just born yesterday.
I'm very sympathetic to this, Richie, because I've been trying to learn editing, video editing, and I am the absolute worst person in the class.
I said to another lawyer only 3 days ago, you people, as in lawyers and barristers and solicitors, you'll never use 5 words where you can use 200, right? I think we'd agree on that. Imagine you're talking to me. I don't know anything about this. How did it come to be that there was a global agreement on what to do with the world's gold? Remind our listeners of that and make it as simple as we can.
Yes.
You're going to find it difficult.
It's very simple.
Go on.
It's very simple. Gold is gold and paper is paper. And the reason gold is worth something is because it's very difficult to recover. It takes a lot of people, a lot of hours to mine the gold. You have to sift through it. And we've been doing this for time immemorial. And people have come to recognize the value of gold. And it has maintained its value over the centuries. And a lot of people say there can't be as much gold as you say there is because it's so hard to mine. And it's true that it's very hard to mine, but if you're just going back 5,000 years, it's not the right time to go back. You have to go back to the previous ice age, because we can tell that very smart people were around and were civilized because we've seen maps that they created. They were very good cartographers. We have seen maps that show the coastline of areas that are now under ice. And you can tell that the coastline is there because now we have the radar and you can see exactly what the coastline is. And you can also look at the ruins of civilizations that go back many more years than the 6,000 years that we're told is the beginning of our history. So there was a lot of time to mine gold, and there's a lot of gold. That's the first thing. So gold is there.
It's plentiful. It's plentiful, right? There is massive amounts of it around the world, held in bank vaults, held by people. It's unlimited, isn't it? We have no idea, but it's just infinite. There's that amount of it.
Well, we have the paperwork showing how much was put into this trust. And one of the really wonderful...
Sorry to interrupt. Remind our listeners who set the trust up, when, and what was the purpose of it.
Okay. This is the wonderful story.
I'm sorry to be doing this to you. I'm really sorry to be doing this to you, but the reason I'm doing it is because we're talking to new listeners all the time.
That's right.
People are saying, Richie, you're assuming knowledge. You and Karen are having a chin wag there about stuff we have no idea about. So ask Karen to remind us again who set up the trust, how it was legal, how it was bonded, and why don't we know about it. So who set it up, when and how?
Right. And let me also say that if anybody wants to ask me questions, go to my website. I've got a contact page. I answer all of my email. Okay. Now let's go back to how this trust came into being. There is a man named Jose Rizal in the Philippines who didn't like what was going on in the Vatican. And he was a very, very clever man. And what he did was he went along with it. And he convinced them that he was loyal. But if you read his early writings, he was planning on stealing from the Vatican, and that's what he did. So he went along with them, and he ended up going to the Vatican, and he ended up rising through the ranks because he was so very, very accomplished. And one of the very interesting things that's just recently happened is I've been getting a lot of information from people all over the world, and I never know who to believe. Yes? So I got a story about who Jose Rizal's parents were, and I accepted it, but then I started getting a little uncomfortable about it, and I started to do a little bit more research. And I came to the conclusion that no, he's not descended from British royalty. There was a story that Queen Victoria had a son had a twin who went to the Philippines. No, she did not. Jose Rizal is 100% Malay, I think. In any event, what I did was I wrote that I thought that he was not adopted. There's no reason to think he was adopted. He has many, many siblings. So in any event, once I wrote that no, there was a quite strong likelihood that Jose Rizal was just descended from the Malay people, somebody sent me the most incredible document. It's the minutes of meeting where Jose Rizal signed over the gold to this trust for 50 years. The minutes of meeting. And I posted that. So that's, and when I posted it, what I wrote was I said, the Philippines is entitled to their own land, because what people were saying was that since there was British royalty involved with the parentage of Jose Rizal, therefore the land of the Philippines belongs to the British royalty. And if Jose Rizal is 100% Malay, that means that the land belongs to the Philippines. And that's what I tweeted. I said, I think the land for the Philippines belongs to the people in the Philippines. And that's when I later got this wonderful document, which just proves that this world's gold was handed over to the people. And the way the people get their gold, because that's what people say, well, what good is it if I don't have it? And so there's the Board of Governors, which are the ministers of finance on the World Bank and International Monetary Fund Board, that take over the functioning of the IMF. And that's actually, that is how I came to be. I'm something called the Overseer Mandate Trustee. That's a fancy word. What it really means is that I am just acting in place and giving voice to the countries. And when I was in the World Bank legal department, I knew that there was going to be a fight on my hands when I went in there. I went in there deliberately because when the Vietnam War was being fought, I left the United States. That's how I went to Holland. That's how I learned, I speak Dutch. That's how I have my degree in economics. So I was hired into the World Bank because people knew that I really wanted to help the developing world. I became a development economist. And I started in the legal department seeing all kinds of things that didn't make any sense, that were corrupt. I didn't know anything about the world's gold or the role of the World Bank, but I did know that the place was corrupt, because if you look at what the Board of Governors is supposed to do, and there's also a Board of Executive Directors, that's 25 individuals who are supposed to be running the place, I saw that they weren't fulfilling their function. I saw that the president of the World Bank was running the place, and he was supposed to take orders from the board. So I went to the board and I said, listen, you're not doing your job. You have to tell the president that he has to follow your instructions because the place is corrupt. And the day after I said that, that was when I was locked out.
That's right. Yeah.
But before that happened, I had a discussion with a couple of important directors. One of them was the Norwegian director, Svein Aas, who reinstated me and wanted me to be back in there and clean up the corruption. But I knew he was leaving. So I went upstairs to the Russians and I said, Svein Aas wants to reinstate me. I want you to know that I am simply there as acting general counsel. If I step out of line, if I'm doing anything that you don't want me to do, you throw me out, because as far as I'm concerned, my only function is to give voice to the board.
Can I ask you this, Karen? When you were at the World Bank, I don't think we've ever gotten into this too much over the years we've known one another. When you were there, did you know that the institution itself, did you instinctively know, or did you not know because of compartmentalisation, that basically it wasn't a force for good at all? That in fact it was a very dark, very sinister organisation whose function was basically to use the notion of debt to enslave people, to enslave countries and economies, to pick off, as you said earlier on, the real wealth of those countries, as we say so many times, land, water, gas and oil reserves. When did you know that? Did you know that from the beginning when you were there?
It has been, when you have an old Kodak camera and you see it develop and things come into sharper focus?
Yeah.
It was just like that. So you can see, as I've got voluminous correspondence. I'm always writing to everybody. It's like scaling a wall or rappelling. I'll go to one side and then the other and climbing to get to the apex of this corruption. I knew that there was corruption, and each time I would try to figure out who was doing what to whom. And by the way, we're still in the middle of this. Even if after we get our gold, we still have a long way to go. But at least we'll be working together, and the whole point is to be very transparent. But you can see in the power transition model how naive I was, because I had to, the way the power transition model works from the Department of Defense is you have to assign values to who the stakeholders are and what their position is. And as far as the countries go, that wasn't so hard because they have a certain weighted vote in accordance with the size of their economies. And I knew where the countries were. But where I was totally wrong was I didn't understand that the media was not going to be on the people's side. But that wasn't as important, actually, as the actual countries. So this model still has validity. And I was just modeling internally at the World Bank, but Jacek Kugler, the political scientist, was modeling the world. And he told me that my model was a microcosm of the whole world model. So I have every single day I'm putting pieces of the puzzle together. And that's one of the characteristics that you have to have in figuring out what's going on. You can't jump to conclusions and stick to them. You always have to be prepared to revise them based on the current situation. So I like to say, if it walks like a duck and talks and quacks like a duck, it must be a duck.
It must be a duck. If you were ever to be successful, and we've known each other long enough that we can be honest with one another, I think as smart as you are, I shouldn't be so negative, but I'm going to be. I don't think you're likely to succeed, right? I hope you do. But if you are successful and the world becomes an infinitely better place to be in, and the precious metals, the value, the wealth of the world is returned to the people collectively of the world, which is what you're after, the gold. How would that work then, in terms of how it would be distributed, how it would be used as a currency? What would we do then? If I went to work then for somebody, or if I went to work on something, who would pay me? How would it work? How would currency then be issued?
Okay, let me start out with your first point.
Yeah.
I'm going to get way ahead of myself, but I think people need to know exactly who the stakeholders are. There is a different stakeholder that's actually more powerful than the countries, than the corrupt network of global corporate control. That's something called the collective unconscious. If you see how swallows fly, they don't crash into each other. They all swirl around because they're all interconnected. That is the way ants are in an anthill. They're all functioning as a unit. And that's the way humanity is. We are a social network, and we're all interconnected on all kinds of different levels. We have all kinds of capabilities. Some of us have more capabilities than others. And the best capability I have is that I'm very happy to work together with people who have better capabilities than I do. I have little teeny abilities in some of these areas, but there are people who are they're ringers, and we're all working together. And so there is, if humanity is a big collective unconscious, the biggest part of humanity is our spiritual side.
But how many of us are in touch with it, though?
It doesn't matter.
It
They're
does.
in touch.
Karen, it does.
Let me tell you, Richie.
Go on.
They're in touch with us. They're
Right.
in touch with us. And so if you look at humanity as a big group of one, we're all united. And if you look at that.
So are you saying then that as people become more awake to the reality of the world and what the world really is, many of us now believe it's a software program that we've downloaded, that it isn't real, in the sense that we have been taught to believe it's real. Are you saying that as people become more awake and more alive to this, is that without even realising it, there will be a subconscious movement, a growing mass spiritual movement towards reclaiming our sovereignty and reclaiming our lives effectively away from those? Is that what you're saying?
Let me answer you, but let me add another fact to this, because there are a lot of people, when you start talking about these subjects, try to discredit you. They say you're completely off your rocker by talking about these things. So let me talk about gold. There is a form of gold which is called monoatomic. I don't remember the name of the farmer in Arizona who found this form of gold on his farm, but he went and did some scientific testing of it, and it had a very strange property. He spent millions of dollars to figure out what monoatomic gold was. And when you heat it up to a certain temperature and you look at it through its spectrography, you see that it gets very light at a certain point, and then it goes up in smoke. It vanishes, which tells us that there is something different about this dimension and other dimensions.
Absolutely. I would never try to discredit you, by the way. You know who you're talking to, and this program explores these themes all the time. I'm wide open to this. I really am.
Okay, so let's get back now to this question about whether we can win, whether this is something that can win. And this is also a question. People say, well, Karen, you have to be a shill or you would have been dead. And the fact of the matter is they have done all kinds of horrible things to me physically, and they have threatened my family, and it has not been a picnic. But the thing about me is I was a fencer. So I'm not somebody, I'm a girl, but I'm not somebody who's going to walk away from a fight.
You've got courage, yeah. There's no doubt about that.
No,
yeah.
It's not courage. It's a special brand of stupidity. I don't back down. There are times when my family has had to physically restrain me because they knew I was going to go to jail and I was stupid and I couldn't back down. You can't put me in reverse. I'm incapable of it. It's not a good characteristic, but that is who I am. So I'll tell you about the conversation that I had with a man who was telling me General Dunford thinks he has the right to run the United States or the military, because I think at this point, because I've given him so much prominence, I think they've probably assigned the right to somebody else. So either it's General Dunford or somebody else thinks they have the right to run the United States. And there was a man who called me up and told me that I had to take orders from General Dunford. And I nearly bit his head off. I said, I have news for you. General Dunford has got to take orders from me because I'm the one who can say what's happening to the world's gold, because I'm speaking for the people of the earth who own that gold. So you tell General Dunford that he is going to be out of luck if he thinks I'm going to be following his orders. Now, the military has some very strong capabilities, and they used that stuff on me. And my family was very, very alarmed because I was hurting for a couple of days after they cranked that stuff up. But I recovered. How is it that I recovered? I recovered because I am being shielded. They tried to erase very important documents on my computer. There was somebody named Anna von Reitz who's working for the Vatican, and she put a claim in for the world's gold, and I had to answer that thing in 10 days. I answered it, and then they took away my answer, and they said that I had never answered it, and therefore she won. And I couldn't find it because they had erased it in my computer. Well, somebody came into my computer and gave the document back to me. That's how things work. I'm right at the crosshairs.
And do you have a big, how sizable is the team working with you, Karen? What sort of support?
It's all of humanity, Richie. It's all of humanity. That's the whole point.
Right. I'm not
working for all of humanity.
Yeah, no, but I mean practically, what sort of a team do you have working on the paperwork, on the investigations, on that sort of stuff? How many people have you got helping you? I hope it's quite a bit.
It's everybody, because everybody can come in and send me an email. Everybody can send me an email, and they do. And the people that have something really to say and to contribute. That's how I learned about thorium, which is the way that we should have had nuclear energy instead of this light water stuff, which is so dangerous.
We're just about, it's 10 minutes to the top of the hour. We've got about another 2 or 3 minutes before we've got to wrap it up. What's brilliant about it is it stirred a huge debate amongst our listeners on Twitter. I think a lot of, and people can go on to Twitter and go to the Richie Allen Show. Just put the Richie Allen, sorry, don't do that. Put Richie Allen Show, all one word, into Twitter. Then press enter, and then you will see what everybody else is saying. So it's Richie Allen Show, all one word. Largely, Karen, and it's always the case when we talk, people support you, but they think you're fighting an almost impossible battle. As wars are being waged in the Middle East, as there's a plan to bring Russia and China into a conflict with the West, it really appears like that, to decimate the Middle East and to drive millions of migrants out of those countries into Europe, to overwhelm those countries as we're seeing it happen. People are saying, there very well may be the historical proof that Karen is talking about us owning the gold and the gold being kept for us. But what difference is it going to make as the agenda moves on in the bloodthirsty, maniacal way that it is at the moment? And I'm going to let you finish on that. Convince our listeners who say, yeah, we like what she's saying. It's a bit out there, but we like it. But it's not going to happen because of the way things are going. Answer that one, and then we'll leave it for today.
It is the power transition model, which is 90 to 95% accurate. It has a track record, and it is on course. Once I and Elaine Colville, who was a whistleblower from an entity in the World Bank, got our statements up on the UK Parliament website, the model predicted with 90 to 95% accuracy that we were going to get our gold. I didn't know that we were talking about our gold. I thought we were talking about cleaning up the corruption. But just look at it. If you're this entity, this huge conglomerate, and if you don't own the gold, then you get put in bankruptcy. I have already filed the statements, the financing statements, showing that this entity is bankrupt because they are not able to meet their debts as they come due. So we have already, the countries, the paperwork, the legal paperwork shows that we are the owners of the gold and we are entitled to it. And now where we are was I've been talking to all of the lawyers of the world. I've been telling them that they don't have a legal profession anymore because they are trying to make it seem like everything is fine, like the parliament is really working for the people, when in reality they're just bought and sold by the network of global corporate control. So when I then took the rug out from under them and said that they were in interregnum, what can they do? If they are in interregnum. And that's exactly what I said in the United States. I said that this military government that thinks they're allowed to run the world behind the scenes, no, they're not. And of course, we didn't talk about the fact that they were trying to nuke Charleston in 2013, and then they tried to fire a first shot against Russia. That didn't work. Why didn't it work? It's because we have this. Think of when you've got a very strong uncle who's going to defend you. Nobody's going to pick on that kid who's got a strong uncle. Well, we have a very strong uncle. That strong uncle is this collective unconscious of humanity. So nobody's going to pull a fast one on us because we've got the wealth, we've got the political science game theory model showing that there are coalitions that are much stronger than the network of global corporate control. And what is the most important is that we have people who understand that we win. And they're not frightened. They're just going to do what needs to happen to get things set straight. What I was hoping we were actually going to talk about, Richie, was when we're in control, which we are going to be in control, are we going to be able to meet our challenges? Are we going to care for the people? Or are we going to, like a young adolescent, get in the race car and zoom it and crash it?
Well, I'll tell you what, next time we're on, we'll certainly discuss that, in a post Zionist crazy reality. How are we going to function with one another? That's a fascinating subject, Karen. I love
that. That is the real subject, Richie.
That's the real subject, yeah.
That's the real subject.
Yes, because it is for you, of course, and for others, because, and when I say others, I mean, friends of mine, whom I could name, who absolutely believe that, that there's going to be a positive result, a positive end game, a positive outcome to all of this, and that when there is, well, how we go about then building, a future after that is certainly interesting. I'm just going to quickly give a mention to Karen's website. It's kahudes.net. I've tweeted it out already. We're right out of time. I've got basically 90 seconds to get out, so I've got to do that. Karen, it's always a pleasure. Love your company. Thanks for coming on the show again.
Thanks for having me, Richie.
An honour. Look after yourself and stay in touch with any developments. That was Karen Hudes, of course, former senior counsel for the World Bank Legal Department, the woman who blew the whistle on endemic corruption in that organisation back in the mid-2000s. Fascinating stuff, regardless of what you think.